What's up, everyone? It's Adar coming at you with another episode of Startup Engineering Daily. Let's hop right into it. So, our first story is from Vercel announcing that Vercel Sandbox, what they call the secure compute environment for agents, is now generally available. And essentially, what Vercel Sandbox is like a VM that you can spin up through the cloud, and you can like clone Git repos to run Git commands, for example, or just run code that's quote unquote not safe, or run untrusted code on the system. And it's used a lot for like Claude Code. I don't know if they use Vercel Sandbox or who they use, but things like Claude Code in the web, for example, where it's like you send a prompt and then it clones the repo down and then runs on it and makes a PR. Those are usually using some sort of sandbox infrastructure. And it is interesting because I thought for a long time that all of these services like Cursor, et cetera, were just using like grep to evaluate these GitHub repos, but it does seem now that they're all using semantic search. So it would have to clone the repo down, create indexes, manage that, share indexes. That's all talked about in the Cursor semantic search blog post, but nonetheless, Vercel Sandbox is now generally available. Cloudflare also has a competing product that's very similar, and it'll be very interesting to see how we move towards these VM things. Like I've said before, like the age of AI really makes it so that all of these best practices kind of have to be utilized or are just much more easy to utilize as opposed to just, running untrusted code on like VMs that we have to spin up. We now have these APIs that we can just run sandboxes, and you can also snapshot sandboxes as well on Vercel. So if you have like a GitHub repo cloned, you can take a snapshot and you can spin up another sandbox without having to clone it all over again. Next, we just have a cool little tweet from Anthropic. I'm not too experienced in like all the space exploration stuff, but they did have Perseverance rover, which is a rover on Mars, use Claude to plan out a 400-meter expedition essentially. And the blog from Anthropic working with NASA JP is really cool. There's actually a really interesting documentary about the Perseverance rover that talks about, and the blog talks about it as well, where it's like they don't get real time, right? I think it's like 8 minutes or something back and forth, or maybe like a few minutes back and forth for the signals. So you can't like control it like with a remote. You essentially have to make the whole expedition plan and then ship it and then check later to see if it actually worked. And if they run into rocks or if they get dust or any of these problems that could just stop the rover, it just causes a ton of problems. But essentially, they worked with Claude to create the plan. They went back and forth. Obviously, the humans checked it, but it is cool to see like how AI is really driving forward all of these different industries. And the blog post is really cool and very like cinematic as well. So check it out if you're interested. Next, we just have a really quick one from this guy CJ, and he's referencing an article from Matt Pocock, who basically is working on all these different things. He has this website called aihero.dev, which basically gives you a bunch of courses and a bunch of systems for building with AI in this new age. Very cool. He used to kind of be like the TypeScript guy, but now he's kind of the AI guy. So very cool. He has a lot of wisdom. But essentially, there's this document that he wrote about creating like your AGENTS.md and making sure that you're not wasting tokens and just making things really flat. And this guy, CJ, said he basically didn't even read it. He just copied it into Claude, and it reduced his token usage on his AGENTS.md across multiple directories, and he reduced his token usage by 76%. So that's pretty cool. Definitely something to check out. There is something interesting about like taking these blog posts. I forget which blog post I did it for, but it was one very similar to this where I was like, I'm just not reading it. I'm just dropping it into Claude, to see how it works. So it is one of those things where it's like, and we'll talk about this in the next story as well, where kind of reducing the human cognitive load to these results, but then not really understanding how the results work. There is a balance to that. And we do have to make sure that we keep learning and we keep iterating on our own knowledge as well, not just like the written knowledge in Anthropic. That's where like PR review and all this stuff is super important, or just reading the blogs, I guess, or asking Claude for the main takeaways. But check it out and you might be able to reduce your token context. Next, we have a bit of an experiment that Anthropic ran essentially on testing software engineers using AI versus not using AI and seeing how it leads to quote unquote mastery of skills. So you can read a bit more about it, but essentially the overview is that they ran this experiment where they got mostly junior developers who write Python at least once a week to try out this framework called Trio, which is essentially like an asynchronous library, like an async await, but for Python. And they broke it up into different steps where they did like a 10-minute warm up, and then they did like a 35-minute test to make people implement something in Trio. And then they did like a quiz after to see how they did. And they broke it up into a group that was using AI to build the Trio piece, the second step. And they had a group that was just fully manual human input. And they noticed that actually the speed was pretty much the same. They said the AI group finished about 2 minutes faster than the non-AI group, but it was negligible, they said. But then in the quiz, the team that was not using I think had 17% worse outcomes on the quiz about Trio compared to the team that did not use AI or the group that did not use AI. So it does speak to how if you're using AI, you don't really understand it, but you can still kind of get the job done in the same time. It was interesting that the AI was about the same speed or negligible speed. But they did say the people that were using AI to kind of probe into the way the library works and understand it deeply did have better results on the quiz. But essentially, as a overall, the group that used AI was 17% worse than the group that wasn't. And even I think the group that was good was still only like 60% on the quiz. So it wasn't even like they were doing well. Like one takeaway is that neither of these guys could master it, and it takes a while to understand mastery for these libraries. But they did say too that the group that wasn't using AI ran into more bugs out the gate because obviously they didn't have AI to write the code for them. But because of that, they actually had a deeper understanding of Trio, the library, and because of that, had better results on the quiz. And the last story for today is just some stock market stuff. It's really interesting. So Google launched this Project Genie, which I'm sure people have seen, and it essentially like generates these quote unquote games. I don't know if it's actually interactive or if it's just like a view. I guess it must be interactive because of how excited people are about it, but I haven't actually seen like people using controls or like doing different things. It's just kind of like a demo or like a trailer, where they're just kind of playing on your behalf. But after Google launched this Project Genie, you can see here that like Unity, Epic, and a bunch of other companies dropped a decent amount because the investors are like, games are going to be started being made with AI. But I like this tweet from Sebastian here, who I guess is building a renderer, and he's former principal engineer at Unity and Ubisoft. And he's saying game dev investors don't seem to understand tech, which may be true. He's saying Genie 3 has less than 3 minutes of persistence. It forgets what happened. Environment could be completely different when you return. It doesn't support interacting with anything. Physics interactions seem similar to screen space particles, erratic and not precise. I don't know exactly what that means, but not precise physics and not deterministic, right? Because that's the main thing with AI is like it's very good with generative, but it's not deterministic. And essentially, maybe there's a piece here where you could buy into these companies. I don't know. I'm not a huge investor, but it seems like, dropping 20% based on Project Genie. I don't think AI games are coming anytime soon. If anything, I think cloud gaming is actually going to make more of a renaissance than AI gaming, in my opinion. And it's one of those things where it's like Google was doing Stadia like almost 10 years ago, but they're just always so early to these new innovations. But now cloud gaming, I do think is going to be a new wave and just something interesting to check out. This kind of stuff interests you and you want to talk with some like minded people, join the Audionato Discord in the description. Thanks.